In the same way the Industrial Revolution reshaped labor, automation is revolutionizing our modern workspaces. It's turning organizations into innovative powerhouses. Escaping the limitations of the IT domain, automation is now a leadership-driven discipline, a cornerstone of top-performing organizations. But anyone seeking this level of competitive differentiation is going to run into some important questions like, well, what to automate first? Who's going to lead this? How do we measure success? The simplicity of the term can be misleading. Unique, tailored approaches can succeed in the long run, provided that all stakeholders maintain their focus and commitment over time. But that's a lot of risk for something so important. Company-wide automation, the kind that permeates the organizational culture, is currently the road less traveled. However, there are maps available to guide your journey. So as evidence, consider one of the most impactful reports in the WWT Research Series, Automation Priorities for 2023. Now, the listed priorities include governance, a people-first approach, scaling grassroots efforts, investing in observability, and at the top of the list, drive a top-down strategy. See, the strategy is positioned first because it emphasizes the importance of leadership and strategic direction in automation efforts. Without it, the rest of the priorities risk falling into irrelevance. Worldwide Technology has built an impressive practice in this domain, successfully guiding numerous clients through this transformation. Notably, they have also undertaken this transformation within their own organization. See, WWT is a privately held $17 billion enterprise with over 9,000 employees. And in 2019, they launched a company-wide strategic analysis and overhaul of their entire supply chain. Now, much more than just a project, Supply Chain 22X was an extended effort to improve how they went about their business. The complexity of their supply chain is immense. Managing offshore logistics, high volume orders, assembling solutions from global suppliers, and integrating legacy supply chains. Well, with over 2,000 global clients and 100 plus technology partners, they have around 270,000 open purchase orders at, any given moment. Now, it's considered, of course, a noteworthy accomplishment that they did this, but there were several inefficiencies that they've since overcome, and they're ready to share with us. So with our exploration of the top-down strategy priority, it's fitting to hear about this from an executive that led the transformation. Jeree and Hanavec, Executive VP of Global Operations, manages WWT's vast technology supply chain, shipping to 115 plus countries and rolling out thousands of systems weekly. With 15 years at Worldwide, Jeree has led one of the company's most significant tech initiatives. But as we like to do, we will also explore how this priority holds up with their client base, the customers. Well, Anshul Chaturvedi is a principal in WWT's management consulting group, and he's a co-lead for their automation practice. He is here with customer stories highlighting more real-world experience from that perspective. You're going to be so glad you attended this one. My name is Rob Boyd. Welcome to WWT Presents Research, accelerating results through the knowledge and achievements of those who came before us.
So, you think about what automation is, and you think about what's really the topic over the past couple of years has been around supply chain. And that's what I'm responsible for. From the time that we get an order from a customer to how we get the product in, how we get it through our labs and ultimately out the door distributed, that's what my team controls. And if anything that we've learned over the past couple of years with supply chain that's top of mind, it's around how do you do it faster, quicker, and then you show up better for the customer. And the only way you solve for that, in my view, is around how automation can help our team and our customers be more connected.
So you've been involved with leading some big changes at Worldwide. Do you mind telling us as much as you can about the projects you've been a part of?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think, when I first kind of came into this particular role at Worldwide, it was more around focusing about what outcomes we were looking to drive. And, and I think that's where it starts, answering the question around how do you even automate something if you don't know what outcomes you're trying to drive for. And so we spent a lot of time really over the past, for a couple of years, trying to outline how do you go tackle some of these outcomes that you want. And, customer delight is obviously something we strive for, but it's also around how do you reduce cycle time? How do you get information and data collected, good data collected to make better decisions. And so we've kind of been on a journey of process, defining what our processes are, what data we need as a part of those processes, and how do we make that data rich in such a way that automation really becomes the springboard that helps us deliver on that outcome.
And do I understand correctly? You guys kicked off this, I say project, but it's really much more than that. In 2019, I believe. Can you be specific about what was driving the need to do something different, and how was it approached as it relates to kind of what we're talking about today?
2019 was kind of, I always say, a catalyst year. There's always a catalyst that causes organizations to want to drive change. And for us, it was just growth and moving. We were moving buildings. And in that process, we learned that we need better processes, if I can just say it that way. And so we kicked off an initiative starting in 2020, and we titled it Supply Chain 22X, with the X kind of just indicating that it lives on well beyond 1 year or one event. And so Supply Chain 2020X became, how do we show up and do global order promising to our customers and get predictable outcomes for them to be able to tell when they're going to get their gear into their data centers or into the field. And that became really the catalyst of the journey that we've been on and continue to live on here even in 2023. Very focused events every year, trying to drive specific outcomes that are measurable. That journey continues to evolve. And like I said, I think it continues on well beyond the 2020X at some point in time in the future.
Excellent. Jeree, thank you. And Anshul, I'm curious what parts of your background are most important to understand for this topic?
My background has been in AI as well as automation. And, that is a big theme that we are seeing in the industry. My role specifically is to take our automation services to companies and help them execute on automation internally. So, a lot of what Jeree talked about was, Worldwide's business of helping companies set up their ITN and business ecosystems. A lot of other parts of what Worldwide does is, providing advisory and execution services to companies, out of which automation is a key area. Over the last couple of years, especially over the last year, as monetary conditions have tightened up, a lot of our customers have gotten focused on cost reduction and cost optimization, more so than even revenue generation. And, automation is a big part to play there because a lot of our customers have got large on-prem footprints and manual processes. So my role really is to take our, automation portfolio across the board and offer it to our customers to help them, build automation teams, center of excellences, as well as capabilities to drive internal reduction of manual labor and cost. The work we do, spans across different business units. So typically we're dealing with internal automation teams at companies that are being pulled in by their own business units. Supply chain, as Jeree mentioned, is a big one that companies are getting requests from automation. But then, these CIOs or, centers of excellence for automation are also getting requests from the marketing team, from the finance team. There are all of the different business groups that are reaching out to them. So we're really helping companies build that internal muscle memory to be able to execute on automation in a scalable manner, going from one group to the other. And, again, as I mentioned, over the last couple of years, as economic and monetary conditions have tightened up, that has become a bigger and bigger theme.
And it's interesting. So I feel like, obviously, as it's been established, we're focused around the priorities report that Worldwide has published, and specifically around the very first priority, which is around a top-down, the necessity of a top-down strategy. And so as we talk about that here, I think we can easily eliminate the fact that automation is such a broad term that I feel like people who do scripting and do things to accelerate their workflow, that's all good, and those sometimes become inroads to bigger projects. But this is really about the strategic organization-wide initiative and how to do that in the right way. Because if you're going to save money, if you're going to be outcome focused, as Jeree said, these things require a lot of planning up front. And I think that so the top-down piece, the paper specifically speaks to three things, three questions that were highlighted as being broad, certainly, but really about you're getting different answers from different stakeholders depending on how it's asked, and just to kind of highlight it. So it's really what should we automate first, who should lead, and how do you know it's working? So those are obviously at different ends of the spectrum as well. But I'm curious if you could comment on this. Jeree, I'll go back to you. when you think of those questions, why are those important to establish? How does that relate to the importance of top-down strategy in being successful?
Well, I mean, it's the age old, hey, what's important to leadership and management is important to everybody else in the organization. And so I kind of feel like if I'm not leaning in and being an active member, seat at the table, listening to what our after challenges are, what outcomes we're trying to drive for, then it's not necessarily going to be an important component at the table at everybody underneath me, if you will. So for me, active engagement has been extremely important to understand, listen to understand what our teams are feeling and hearing, and more importantly, listen to what our customers say. Because, customer satisfaction and keeping customers are top of mind for us at Worldwide. And so we don't like losing customers. So listening to customers and what's important to them certainly helps me to drive the right strategy back in my organization that can deliver on that outcome to make them happy and want to stay as a long-term partner of ours.
You're at the very top of the organization, maybe not the top, but you're very much at the top. Is that high enough, or was this something in your case where you're like, no, this is such a company-wide effort? Yes, it's you, but it's also maybe above you in terms of just saying, this is important, I want everybody to pull together?
No, absolutely. Because I don't think you get there without investment, right? So the importance of your CFO being a seat at the table, understanding why you're asking for IT resources and assets to help you lean into solving some of these complex issues, being your executive VP of program management, the things that you might need to lean into for the customer and how the customer can help us is extremely important, all the way to, even our CEO. If you look at Jim's importance and especially around, kind of just automation, scaling with the business, that's got to be at the top of mind. And so keeping us as a cohesive unit, understanding what we're trying to do and why we need to invest in certain pieces have been critical for us to make the progress that we've made over the past several years.
If I can add to that as well, something that we see very often with large companies, when you think about something like automation, it directly drives business impact. Whether it's cost reduction, whether it's revenue increase, it has a direct impact. It's not, 3 steps away. So, it's very important as we start working with companies, right, that we nail down what that line of impact is and measure it, so that there is a way to prioritize what you need to do first. As Jeree mentioned, automation has become a bigger and bigger theme at companies, and it's got C-level visibility because of its ability to drive direct bottom and top line impact. And, very early and upfront, figuring out, if you've got 10 good ideas, even at an order of magnitude level, right? How does the 10th rank with number 9? That stuff becomes important. And, the more planning and, prioritization you can do upfront, the better the road down the line.
We're looking at automation specific under priority 1, and they mentioned risk of not doing this. So this would be the risk of not implementing a top-down strategy. And the reason why I'm curious about this is I feel like a lot of times things may bubble up from underneath, where there's someone in the mid-level of the organization or a group of people that are saying this is important, and they're doing maybe things on a departmental level in their silo. But the reason why you have top down is you're saying, well, this is either important to our company and we want to make sure that the resources are all aligned, and that's going to require some collaboration across the different groups. But specifically the risk outline were about automating inefficient processes, making sure you're doing database decision making versus emotional. You think about the people who are in charge of each unit. If it's not top down, I would assume they may push back and go, this isn't a priority for me right now based on my goals and what I need my team. But Anshul, sticking with you for just a moment, how much when customers are engaging with you guys or your clients, are they already aligned properly and they've already got top down, or is that something you sometimes have to educate on and kind of figure out, well, how can we help you sell this up so it can be established correctly, or just work within what we've been given?
Yeah, there's different flavors to that. There's companies definitely that we work with that are more developed, that already have a listing of things that they want to do. There are some others where we need to do the fact finding and figure it out, right? So, we work with both sorts of models. A lot of times when we're working with the latter, We need to do workshops, group discussions, even to get ideas to be shared. A lot of companies, when people are working in their day jobs, they are not thinking directly about what I can automate. They are focused on their day jobs, right? So for companies that don't have that priority listing, often we need to do workshops and things of that nature to even get them to think, creatively and bubble up those ideas. But then, once you have a set of those ideas, often the top line leadership isn't aware of them. So, getting people into a room and doing a collaborative workshop, really having marketing teams talk to finance team and compare and contrast their ideas, right? Where they don't really often do that from the lens of automation, tends to be helpful for executive leadership, right? Because they can then prioritize and calibrate within the different groups and really pick out which are the things to drive. But it's also important for scalability because I mentioned earlier that a lot of automation teams at companies are being centralized. These center of excellences are being set up. I gave that example of for instance, marketing, finance, supply chain. If you've built an automation workflow for a marketing team and it can be leveraged for two other groups, you want it to be scaled and you want it to be leveraged, right? What often happens in automation success stories is that they are snowflake stories. They are embedded in a part of an organization where they create an impact, but it's small impact. Unless you add it up, it doesn't really make sense for the top line. So the top level approach is important for both of those reasons. To find out what to focus on first, but even figure out how it scales.
Well, and I think these things happen sometimes in these silos because it's easier. And sometimes, we've all worked for big organizations that you're like, I can either, that this stuff could improve at least the area maybe I'm responsible for in middle management. And so I'm going to pursue what I can. But this is obviously about something more strategic. And Jeree, that's why I'm so amazed at what you guys have, decided. And this is one of many examples for you guys. You've been around, over 30 years now. What was important about, do these risks ring true in terms of things that you either experienced or were actively watching out for?
We fought our own internal battles that Anshul talked about, right? Hey, I have, 9 different organizations underneath me, and each organization was running independently. Okay. And so nobody was talking to each other, right? So, and when you think about how that aligns with your IT team, right? The IT team is trying to prioritize across 9 different work streams. And so what do they focus on? And so their customer sat back to us, was suffering, to be honest with you. And so it became really important for us to go, hey, what's the one thing that we can all align to, or, that's most important for us to get through this particular outcome. And I'll give you an example, Rob. Date management was one of them for us, right? Hey, we need a better date in our system, and how do we go after it? And you start peeling back the onion on that. What logistics needs in date management is different than what the lab needs in date management versus what the customer needs.
When you say date management, is date in reference to what? Anything or lead times? What?
It starts with answering this question, right? Hey, the customer wants to know when their product's going to be delivered on site.
Sounds simple.
You would be surprised how difficult that was for us to come up with. Because when you back that up, I need to know when I'm going to ship it. I need to know when it's going to come out of the lab. I need to know how long it's going to take me in the lab. I need to know, and the most critical thing for us was knowing when the product was coming in from the OEM. Because if I don't have, the server or the storage device to be able to build a rack, I'm not going to be able to give you a date. So we ran after specifically our material availability date, the date that we're going to get from our vendors. And you'd be surprised, for us to be able to get that date was a really large struggle. One, we didn't have a lot of ASN connections with our suppliers telling us the dates were changing 5, 6, 7 times in a lead time of 90 days. And keeping that date moving and its impact downstream in the supply chain was pretty massive for us. Yeah. So we said, hey, we're going to lean into date management as it relates to when do I get this part in? And that for us started with lead times. When can I expect this part to come in, right? So I needed to be able to tell my customer when something's going to show up. And believe it or not, we didn't even have lead times in our systems that were being maintained with any kind of accuracy. And this is where automation really helped us, is how do we take the information we have and we create what we call a calculated lead time, for a given part. The data science behind that was remarkably accurate for us to look at from the time we place a purchase order to the time that I could put it away in inventory and be able to have it usable. We got to like 80 something percent accurate in terms of when we could expect parts. All of that was through automation of using our information, not updating our system, not hiring a bunch of people to go in and just manually be updating dates all the time, but automating that process and auto-populating that promise date so that we could schedule the rest of the shipment and actually get to a more predictable, date for our customer. Because if our customer has a better predictability date, that's the number one thing for customer sat for us. And we were struggling for that for sure.
Yeah. Is customer sat the primary outcome you're looking for there? Are there cost considerations or other kind of outcomes that you're like, oh, wow, either we were going for this or they became additional benefits as you started to get deeper into the process? Did that change?
Yeah, so it started with the customer, right? Because that was the big challenge we were trying to drive for. But what we found is the fact that we didn't have dates was also because we didn't have enough people to manage those dates. So it became a scale story. Right? Yeah. It became, hey, do I go hire more people or do I kind of lean into the automation factor that, Anshul had talked a little bit about? I can't hire enough people to keep PO dates updated across, tens of thousands of OEMs and 100,000 PO lines that we've got transacting in our system. So we not only saw the customer a complaint, issue, concern. It was a pivotal part for our holistic supply chain in terms of scheduling, but we also saw the problem with having to hire more people just by leaning into, and again, just kind of stressing ourselves of thinking differently. And that's not something that I think you could drive necessarily from the bottom up because they're going to understand what they understand. You do the top down has to say, let's think differently about it. How can we solve it differently than we've solved it for the past 20 years? And I think that's where the top down strategy combined with the risk assessment, the alignment across your internal teams, and in this case mine, but also alignment with the business in terms of IT and the importance there. It became just really a success story for us in terms of getting us to the next level of customer sat.
Yeah, if I can add to that as well, I love that story for a couple of reasons. I think it kind of highlights two risks that we see at companies, sometimes falter on. Firstly, I mentioned that, often when companies are embarking on this journey, there are a bunch of ideas that might be interesting, that might be important. Having a strong champion early in the journey is a critical success factor. I mean, having a champion like Jeree who's, looking to drive the initiative, that sees the value and is looking to drive it from a business perspective is super important. Sometimes we have seen initiatives where you have an important use case or an idea, but the business leader is partly, championing it. They've got, part of their mind somewhere else.
Sure.
I mean, A, that is a big factor here. B, data, right? I mean, the combination of data and automation is becoming such an important theme. I mean, the way we think about it is, data and AI is really the brains of the organization. Automation is the limbs. I mean, you can get really smart with AI, but unless you are automating things, that last mile of financial impact doesn't come through. So, the fact that, the team was able to identify a data issue that was hampering automation and, went after that data issue, big pattern. That is, a factor of success. Improving your data helps you improve your automation.
Well, and that kind of reminds me, Anshul, I'm curious if you've seen this in your experience, and if Jeree, if you guys went through this as well, is that I feel like you sometimes, when you're tackling something as broad as we need to improve customer satisfaction, just to leave it at that for the moment, it requires a lot of coordination across a lot of different people and areas and people that are busy already, right? No one's sitting around waiting for the next project. But how much do you start with, one set of beliefs and strategies, but then as you start getting smarter at this, because this is something that happens over time, that you discover other ways of taking advantage of things. And so you're able to iterate it and then hold it up against your desired outcomes and say, are we still on track? And do we need to shift a little bit? Does this new data present something new? Is it an ongoing process, Anshul, with clients to really stay on focus but still kind of grow as an organization? Because it feels like this is a big growth thing.
It is for sure. And, there's a couple of reasons why. I mean, A, the moment you embark on the journey, you find out what you can do. You find out the ability that you can drive. Often when people think about automation, they think about jobs going away. That almost never happens. What happens is you can go faster. What teams are struggling with is that, hey, I want to go at 100 miles an hour and I can only go at 50. So, the moment you automate them, they have the ability to go at 100, 120, and so on. And they start to test their speed limits, right? So, what we often find with teams is that as you start automating their tasks, they find new things that they are looking to automate. The moment you start to add a piece of data science, they are looking for the next piece of AI. Can I now use ChatGPT for doing something like this, right? Given the AI space itself is evolving so quickly, the way it interacts with automation is a very interesting space just for the next decade to look at, right?
Yeah,
So
that's a new
given all
twist.
of those factors combined together, we haven't really seen automation as being a project, for instance. It tends to be a program that companies want to build internal skills and capabilities around so that they can go on the journey as opposed to reach their destination next year.
Think about that calculated lead time project. That was the catalyst for, hey, that's one piece of data set. But as we got smarter about, well, we really need vendor lead times, and we went after automation and integration with our OEMs and got vendor lead times. And then we built upon that to now I have a vendor commit to ship date. When are they going to ship and how long is it going to take in transit? We've started to take what was one piece of data and build it now that I can have a host of data sets that we can look at to say what's the right decision in the environment. So if you think about the supply chain challenges, right, vendor lead times were moving every two to 3 days, extending, pulling in as materials became available. So when you have different data sets and you learn from those, no, I need this, well, now I need this, then you kind of put in front of the individuals that Anshul talked about, you don't get rid of their jobs. You turn their jobs into them doing risk assessments and how to best apply that into the business scenarios to solve the problems. Our whole problem was getting materials in. And so we took somebody who saw their jobs as just managing PO dates to, hey, tell us what's the best date you can give me. And that is a very different motivational factor when you're talking about job satisfaction, for individuals who, to Anshul's point, think that their job's going away. No, we're trying to enable them to be smarter about the decisions they're making, not just do repeatable tasks, because that gets boring to anybody's job.
Well, it sounds cool, though. Also, when you outline those flows, is all of a sudden people who may not have had visibility as to, well, how does my part play in the end product? How am I affecting the big picture? That's kind of cool. I could see where that becomes a self-reinforcing measure. But the fact that you guys, because you both are highlighting, these have been interesting times, right? The last couple of years. You guys have been doing this during one of the most challenging supply chain issues we've seen in maybe decades. I could be forgetting quite a few things. Then Anshul, as you well know, AI is nothing new. Those of us in technology have been working with AI for quite some time now. But thanks to ChatGPT, as you mentioned, and some others, boy, everybody either thinks that they know AI and there's the security issues as people play with it. But you both are reminding me that that a company is not. It's one thing about working within your own organization, but Jeree, you're bringing up stuff about working with partners, which involves asking them for something they may not have had to supply before.
So you go back to these large OEMs and you'd ask them for, hey, I need an ASN when you're starting to ship it in. And here's what I need on that ASN so I know what's coming. It's taken us a long time, because they didn't have that capability. And so, going and showing the value that you're trying to drive and how it helps them. In terms of just, hey, I'm going to quit sending you an email and ask you for updates because you're going to give me the updates automatically. It becomes a scale story for your partners, both upstream and downstream, when you can all get to the table and try to solve the problem together. And that's what we've tried to do on multiple occasions.
Well, I bet it becomes bi-directional there too, because as you mature, you're maybe able to give them information that they consider valuable, and the whole partnering can kind of feed on itself in a positive manner, I would think, from that perspective.
Yeah. We've done, work with customers as well that are, struggling with supply chain issues around figuring out dates and things of that nature. Again, these things get customers visibility, right? At the end of the day, if you're working with an OEM that is not giving you a date for a certain part or a thing, the question that you've got to ask yourself is, well, how can I get smarter with what I have? How can I, figure this out?
Yeah.
And that is really where a lot of data science plus automation comes in, because it helps you leverage what you have internally and get ahead of the curve. So for instance, I mean, if you've got a part that you're expecting next month but you think it's going to be late, you've got a model telling you that, hey, we expect this thing to be late. So you can pick up the phone and call up the OEM, right? Without the visibility of
Right.
having the data tell you that it's going to be late, it becomes a chicken and the egg.
Yeah. Well, and just all those dependencies that just make my head hurt when I start thinking about how one thing can affect so many other things and what you guys have had to tackle. And I imagine it's still ongoing, Jeree. Or is it finished or moved
Really.
to a different stage?
I hate, Rob, I say that it never finishes. That's the
Yeah.
reason why we put the X at the end of 22X, because I think it's living on. Because once you solve one problem, you're going after another. And when you think about, like I said, I have 9 different organizations all trying to solve different things. And we have to come back and say, how do we start with the foundation and do we build upon that? And as we build upon it, all the organizations need more. Right. I mean,
Yeah.
it just becomes a living and breathing project that I think, we'll continue to lead in. We still set the goals every year around what we're going to accomplish in partnership with IT for deliverables. We measure our progress. And I would say, active engagement. We talked about the top down. Every month you've got myself, you've got the COO, and you've got the CFO sitting at the table looking at what progress we're making. And so, being there at the table and actively involved in our progress and the commitments to the outcome have been, monumental in us moving the ball forward these past 3 years.
I always wonder if because Worldwide is privately held, and I wonder if that makes a difference. Anshul, I'm sure you work with a lot of publicly held companies. These are things that are going to last longer than a quarter. And so if a company's real myopic in terms of only able to work on something complex if it can be done within 3 months, that could be a problem, I would think. Do you run into cultural issues there that have to be kind of advised?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I want to say that, the rate of these cultural issues has reduced over the last couple of years because of the creation of centers of excellence around automation. I mean, a couple of years ago, automation was thought to be a one-stop solution. And what would happen at that point is, you'd have a change of ownership. Next person comes in, doesn't really understand where it's supposed to go. What we've seen happen as a result of some of those, stop starts at companies is the creation of centers of excellence or, centralized teams within either an IT group or an operations group of some sort,
Yeah.
depending on whether the operation, the automation is business heavy or IT heavy. And these centers of excellence follow typically a two-in-a-box model when automation is being executed. So I mean, there's typically somebody who is from a center of excellence to keep that continuity, but then the core lead, is from the business unit that is trying to drive that operational or business change. What the center of excellence model does is that if you've got churn from a team, there's still connected tissue that is retained within a center of excellence model. And something that we like to encourage customers, we equip customers with as well, is a core set of organizational capability artifacts that these center of excellences work with, right? What is the vision that this company is trying to drive for automation? What are our success KPIs? What are our plans? How do we measure success? Having semantic consistency across these things when projects are being executed across different teams builds that connected tissue so that if there is churn along the team, at least every project is being spoken to in a similar language. The other people in the team have got that
That's a great point.
connectivity from that COE lens. But yeah, great question, because I mean there have been
Yeah.
many stops and starts, and I imagine there are still companies that do have this issue.
Well, on one hand, automation feels like one of those things where, yeah, it could stop and start, but it's like, I don't know anything else. I mean, how does it can't really go away. It's a matter of just how well do you execute and how long does it take you? Because competitive realities are going to force it on you, I would think, to a certain extent eventually, if not already. But then I also think when you say COE, what you're really talking about is the fact that this isn't a project. If you're thinking of automation as a project, then yeah, it's gonna be limited in its scope. It's probably not going to achieve its outcomes. But you're talking about a cultural change. You're talking about how do we do business? Back in the day, I'm sure there was a time we didn't have HR. We certainly didn't have IT. And these things became parts of doing a business. Do you guys see automation as being something that's a department, or is it just interwoven into everything that kind of currently stands in terms of how business gets done? What's the right way to think of this going forward, you think, organizationally?
It can't be just a project because I don't think there's a start and an end to it, especially
Yeah.
with the way technology is changing, way your processes are changing, how your customers are changing. There's so much change around you that if you just stay stagnant, you're probably not going to have a seat at the table in the future. You've got to take an approach of iteration. Quick, measurable outcomes very quickly. I think what companies I've seen happen is you try to boil the ocean all in one fell swoop, and that never solves. So you have to change, and you have to change quickly to stay relevant. And so I kind of go, it's not just a project; it's got to be a part of the embedded culture of who we are and how we act every single day, especially operationally, because I mean it's all about efficiency and scalability for us to get to high levels of operational excellence.
Yeah. And hopefully, do people get that, Anshul, when they start working with you? Are they already in that mindset, or is that part of the educational process for reorienting them?
Yeah, I mean, it's different answers for different industries. Honestly, we see some industries that are more advanced in this space,
Yeah.
typically driven by the costs that they are managing. Sometimes I mean, we talked about competitive advantage before. If you're a global financial, automation is a big way to cut costs, and cutting costs drives up your market cap. It does a whole bunch of things to competitive dynamics, right? So I mean, this is a way that companies are trying to build competitive advantage, especially with the monetary conditions that we've had over the last couple of years. And so if you're in the financial sector, we typically find that you've already got this point of view. Whereas when we look at a lot of other sectors, we don't find the level of maturity. A lot of other sectors are still setting up the center of excellence. They are thinking about maybe doing it, maybe not doing it. So,
Yeah.
it's definitely a part of the solution as opposed to a part of the problem in terms of our viewpoint. And we encourage companies to set up that center of excellence. You don't have to have 100 people army in that center of excellence initially. Have a few people that kind of have the coach-mentee model. Typically, automation is executed in a decentralized manner so that, there are individual business units driving it. But then the connected tissue back to the COE brings the cohesion so that, the knowledge and the IP is all held in one place.
What is one thing that you want people to leave with? Any advice that you maybe you wish you had yourself, or something you wish to give to your peers?
Okay. Boy, one thing is hard. So I'm going to give you a couple. One, I would say, hey, you do have to have a very defined outcome driven approach. You got to know what you're trying to drive for, whether that's your goals, your initiatives are really important. But I cannot iterate enough how much the importance of your senior leadership having a seat at the table and absolutely being actively engaged in the process of how you prioritize, the process of the outcomes you're trying to drive for, and more importantly, helping to peel back the barriers for you to solving problems, because you run into barriers in every one of your work streams as you go through this process. And if you don't have the right people and the right level of senior leadership at the table that can push through those barriers and make decisions quickly, you stall. And that's when I feel very strongly that you see some of these projects fail. So I would just say, hey, make sure you're outcome focused, very much about and clearly defined, but also make sure you're actively engaged in the process.
Right on brand with today's show too. Anshul, what would you recommend to anybody going through? Especially, I always think, and this may not fit where you want to go, but the notion of what do you wish people, what mindset do you wish kind of existed or people came in with when they're engaging with you guys?
Something that we see often with companies, and we try to have companies walk away from, is analysis paralysis. Often, the first part of the journey, which is figuring out what you do, can get super strenuous. People start getting very deep into technology and trying to figure out technology decisions. That prioritization is really not about solutioning. It is about prioritization. So, one thing that we like to encourage companies is to move in the space. Analysis is good, but you don't want to get stuck in analysis paralysis. That's definitely a risk to be mindful of. The other thing that we often see is, the metrics. I mean, while let's say that there's 100 projects for automation, and I'm making up this number, right, that are being executed. The metrics that they are being reported on, if they are uncommon, if they are snowflake metrics that don't tie back together, it often ends up becoming impossible to figure out what's working and what's not. Automation typically drives direct financial impact. Having, again, that center of excellence or a central team measure each and every project with that lens and a common lens is an important factor, because down the line, a couple of years down the line, you might be looking at 20 projects or 100 projects and trying to figure out what worked.
Yeah.
And if they are all reported in different methods, it simply becomes a problem.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Well said. Well said.
When you're hitting between the eyes too, because what I was thinking is the first part of what you were answering there is, I think how easily I get distracted, in terms of I have grand visions and we go in this, and of course I'm just thinking of it very individually, but I feel like this happens organizationally too, is that there's a new shiny object that's going to come up, and it takes some fortitude, organizational fortitude, to really push through and say, it's okay to adjust as long as we're not suddenly chasing wrong metrics, getting fascinated by a new technology, because this is a business working in conjunction with IT. Everything's at play, but nothing is necessarily the only end all except for the outcomes. Great information from both of you, as I fully anticipated. Anshul, Jeree, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thanks, Rob. It was great to be here and great to spend time with my partner, Anshul. Thanks for hosting.
Yep. Thanks, Rob. This was great. Thanks, Jeree, as well. Wonderful experience.
Scaling automation can be overwhelming. It demands data-driven decisions. It necessitates reassessment of work processes. It requires discipline towards organizational goals, and it calls for a willingness to experiment. Well, each automation journey is unique to the organization undertaking it. And while there's no one-size-fits-all guide, these 5 priorities provide reliable starting points for your automation journey. And I've got a few follow-ups. You've just seen our deep dive into the first priority, but priority 2 is a deep dive coming soon featuring Mike Servasio, Global Practice Manager for AI Ops, as well as Kevin Wald, a principal in the management consulting practice. Observability, a non-trivial aspect of the automation strategy that we've been discussing, well, it's essential for providing visibility across the entire infrastructure. This is how you ensure seamless operation, how you identify bottlenecks, and how you drive continuous improvement. That show on observability next month. Available now, however, how to drive an automation strategy from the bottom up. That is the title for our show covering this third priority, scale grassroots efforts. Now, it's worth a watch, if not to simply resolve any dissonance you may feel for how it squares with today's top-down strategy. There are so many more resources to be found on the WWT platform. Don't forget to, of course, just read the paper if you haven't done that already. But remember, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, let's go together. Thank you for watching.